Hi, Michael,
Hi there, Allison.
and welcome everyone to Dean's Discuss COVID-19, a weekly podcast where we dive into the research being done at UC Davis, both at the College of Medicine and the College of Veterinary Medicine.
And today we're talking about the coming of the second wave of COVID-19, which is on everybody's mind, and asking questions such as, are we prepared? Or is this our new reality?
I know it's on everybody's mind. So let's get started. Michael, I think that we thought that COVID was going to come, we would batten down the hatches, and things would return to normal. But what we're talking about now in our medical center is really the new normal. I think we're in this for a little bit longer.
Absolutely. I mean, in addition to our campus around the world, there are a lot of questions being asked, a lot of modeling being done by epidemiologists to try to predict what will be the future for the infection. And certainly that's on a lot of people's minds is all of the different factors. I think as we talk, we can bring some of those out. And epidemiology, of course, is that science that both of our campuses are involved in that involve taking the data that's coming out from infection rates, from rates of spread within the community, and asking questions such as what are the factors? Can we predict what's going to happen in the future? And epidemiology is really at the heart of that. But that's just one factor is the data as it comes in. What are some of the things at the School of Medicine that are happening that really have affected and maybe projected into the future for you, Allison?
Well, some of the things that we're concerned about really is the change in the people who are getting COVID. And so the
Mhm.
people coming in the emergency room now are younger and getting sent home to self-quarantine. And of course, we're seeing lots of concern about college campuses opening. I know myself as a parent of a college student, that's a big concern. So from an epidemiology perspective, I think everybody thought it's going to be the people with the chronic illnesses that are going to get this infection. And now we know that children can be carriers, that we can have young people are not necessarily immune. And there is this issue about how many people does it take to spread. We talked in the past about super spreader events. From an epidemiology perspective, then you kind of begin to think about, well, what is the impact of this in terms of containing the disease? And I think from a new normal perspective is how are we as a society, as educators, going to figure out how to control this disease when without just battening down the hatches. We can't close society forever, but we're going to have to figure out how to educate. So for example, close to home, we are having anatomy class this month with our first year medical students, and we have gone to extraordinary measures with PPE and spacing and the number of people that can be in class to continue to do that. It would be very difficult to have a medical school without having anatomy. Anatomy is core, as you know, to teaching veterinary medicine, core to teaching medicine. So the new normal is going to be this type of hybrid teaching. So I just think it's really going to upend the way we think about everything.
Yeah, I know both of our campuses are preparing for our students. And as you mentioned, we have ongoing clinical and laboratory scenarios where we do have to continue to teach in a in-person fashion. And that means in person, but that doesn't mean that we teach it the same way. And, the physical distancing, we are putting up right now as I speak, tents outside in order to really spread out some of our problem-based cases that we have so that we can have that human interaction, but at a safe distance. And as you mentioned, the laboratories. So education will also be affected by technology. I think, we're thrust into using things like virtual reality, which is really can simulate some of the anatomy questions without having an animal involved. And so we're collaborating with other universities on virtual reality. And certainly that's going to be a big part of our educational delivery over the next year. And maybe some of those things will carry also into the future. You know, another thing that I think we can learn from is that we've had pandemics before, and we have viral infections that have spread worldwide. And if we look at those examples and think about what can we learn from them, in some cases, we've been able to be successful, but those are really a very minor number of those. Smallpox and rinderpest on the veterinary side are the only two that are truly eradicated worldwide. But most of these we live with over time based upon the level of immunity within the population. We call it herd immunity, and that term has been brought out, interestingly enough, as we've learned about the infection in humans. But herd immunity is taught within the classes within veterinary school right from the very beginning, because we know that if 50 or 70% of the population has some sort of immunity, these epidemics will be less. And as you mentioned, we can't shut down the entire economy of the world going forward. So we have to learn to live with this.
Yeah, I think it's also going to be the new normal for our patients. So, we kind of calmed down doing, cut back things for temporarily. We're back now, and there's no way patients can put things on hold either, just like we can't have students put things on hold. So,
Mm-hmm.
we still need to be doing people's hips, and people need their cancer surgery, and we never stop doing those things. But I think there were patients who postponed things. So the new normal is going to also be really bringing in telemedicine as just part of the way you go to the doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be new as well. So I think, it's this is going to change the way we think about everything, I think, from education to research to clinical care.
Yeah, and one of the things I know that you're dealing with also is the spectrum of clinical outcomes that you're seeing. You had mentioned a very important factor, which is the demographics of the population, of the age factors. And certainly that's one factor, and also the different types of diseases. One of the things that I know that as we learn more about them, there are individuals that are called long haulers, which sounds like a trucking term, but in reality, it's a common term that's now being applied to those that have COVID-19 infections, but the symptoms, even after they become less shedding of the virus, persist, and they persist in a variety of ways. Have you noticed that, or have your physicians seen a lot of individuals that may, in fact, have longer term effects from COVID?
Well, I think we may be seeing people who have a longer time to recovery. And so that's actually one of the issues and why we really need to expedite some of these research trials. So we know now that if you use certain drugs like remdesivir, you may be on the ventilator for a shorter time, or dexamethasone. But we really need to understand the recovery of patients. I think the other thing I want to say is that the paradigm for testing has changed markedly over the last couple of weeks. So Francis Collins, the head of the NIH, led a really remarkable town hall with the American Association of Medical Colleges about 10 days ago. And our own UC Health, Carrie Bennington, who is herself an infectious disease doctor, was one of the panelists. And what came out of that discussion was this no need for second testing. If you're positive, you don't need a negative test. And so heretofore, people were doing, 2 negative tests before you had to come out, or had to have a negative test. And, with the constraints that we have on reagents, or the resources, the liquid that you need to add to make the cocktail work to do one of these PCR tests, there's no longer a recommendation for a second test. You're positive, you quarantine, you then become symptom free, and you don't need to have a negative test to return to work. This whole idea about screening asymptomatic people is really problematic if it takes, in some of the commercial labs, a long time, a week or more, to get the test back. That's a real challenge as well. And so we're all going to need to begin to think about this as a public health long-term public health crisis that we're going to have to manage on a day-to-day basis. And so the fluidity of the information out there and what we're doing really it is really challenging to get that out to everyone in an institution, and let alone the country.
Absolutely. I think at a campus level and then our government policy as we think about the testing is critical. As you mentioned, the resource limitations of having enough of the right reagents and things that we need to test are really critical. One of the ways, and I was on that teleconference with Francis Collins, and you and I were both listening as we talked about pool testing.
Yeah.
And people, maybe don't really understand that concept, but that's actually a term that's used frequently in veterinary medicine when we have very large numbers of animals, in our case, in a population with a disease. And instead of having to sample each individual animal, in our case, and in the case of humans, each individual person, pools are taking within a population. And in the case of our phone call the other day, we were talking about 5 to 10 people in a pool. And I know different universities and different groups are looking at pool testing. The other thing that's expanding is looking at our capacity for resources. And there are, and you can explain this better than I can, but laboratories that are specifically designed for diagnostic testing called CLIA laboratories. And there are other laboratories that are capable of testing, but they're not certified that way. And some of these laboratories may be brought in for the pool testing, not to diagnose an individual, but to really look at what is called the prevalence of the disease. So how many people are infected within a population. And those are the kind of expansions of testing that are being explored across the country, and I know on our campus as well. What is a CLIA laboratory,
So
Alice?
this is really important. And as myself as a researcher, a CLIA laboratory is certified for giving clinical test results. So for example, in any research, if you find that someone has an antibody or a gene and it's done in a research paradigm, you are not supposed to give those results because those results have not gone through the clinical rigor of a laboratory. Whereas if you get a test, say a blood count from a CLIA lab, they have quality outcomes and really inspection processes, and they have really ways to assure that everything is done in a consistent manner, both in that lab across the country. So it is highly regulated. What is being suggested, and I think this is very novel and really is an important point because it speaks to what I call the value proposition. Really the strength of coming out of COVID is going to come out of our academic health systems. And the reason is, one that you talked about, is the ability of the academic systems, in other words, the research labs, to stand up things to look at large populations. So for example, if you take a couple thousand people and you do pooling, you would then use reagents for 5 people and get a signal out of that group or that population, and then go back and test if something's positive. And this is really important if you expect the positivity rate to be relatively low, like we do in an asymptomatic population. This is very clever because then it allows us to save the diagnostic tests for people who have symptoms that we need to get into clinical trials. It saves reagents, and it allows us to learn a lot more about the overall prevalence of the disease. And so, Curie, Dr. Byington from UC Health was on that panel, and they had Duke and Penn and UC San Diego were all speaking about the importance of these type of things for monitoring. It is really bringing to light the value that research labs. So I think a lot of us, a lot of people think, not myself, but a lot of people think research labs are off, doing things that aren't going to be relevant for years and years, but these are going to be relevant immediately in terms
So
of
true.
being able to get a handle.
Yeah, and one of the things that's happening, and this goes back into our basic research laboratories, is trying to understand, okay, if we if we can't sample by the traditional methods or through qualified labs, as you mentioned, what are their alternatives? And one of the ways to do that is to use other technologies, sort of what are called high throughput. And these
Yeah.
are being done in other avenues, such as in genomics and genomic testing. You know, we used to spend months to years, and we mentioned Francis Collins, when the human genome was sequenced, it took many, many years to sequence the very first human genome. Well, now we can do that fairly frequently. In fact, in the case of COVID, there are over 50,000, and there are probably more now, whole genome sequences. So the entire strain of the virus, the entire code has been sequenced that are in the database now. And that shows you how rapid the technology has changed. And that can be applied to diagnostic testing as well. And our researchers in our laboratories here at Davis and across the nation are looking at high throughput testing. The other interesting thing, as you pointed out, is, you know, when we started testing for the virus, we used those longer swabs and material that had to get all the way back into the nasal pharyngeal area, all the way back at the back of the nasal cavity, because that was where the virus was certainly being shed. But as technology and as we have more information, they're looking at other sampling methods and where the virus may be detected as well, including saliva. And as that gets perfected and with pooling, there may be an opportunity to save reagents, be able to sample populations more. And so I think one of our new realities is prevalence testing in the future using these new technologies for sure.
Yes, and even some places are talking about testing the water, the sewage, to look at
Mhm.
that. So you know, it's just I am so impressed with the rapid speed. So the rapid speed of things that are going on right now, the rapid approval of trials, the rapid information dissemination, and it's interesting because I think in some ways our Zoom world is contributing to that, because now we, you know, there were 500 people on that call disseminating that information in real time, listening to Francis Collins and the other speakers. Heretofore, you would probably have had 100 people. You certainly would not have had 500 people flying across the
Mhm.
country. So there is some just rapid dissemination of knowledge and then getting that out. The vaccine information is just astounding. The fact that, you know, there's vaccine trials being stood up here at UC Davis. We're very close to hopefully being participating in at least one of those trials. You know, those things are going to be also rapid dissemination of information, and then getting patients in the community to participate, which will be so critical, because for a vaccine, as you know more than I, Michael, with your background, is, you know, we need to test the vaccine in patients who come from all parts of our society and our culture, and understand you know, who might be more immune or less immune. And we've begun to see just a terrible terrible impact in some areas of our society on COVID. And and so this is also going to be really important, that we just get a whole community out there to participate in these type of trials, particularly these vaccine trials.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, in addition to just our own personal behavior of washing our hands and face masks, that's clearly a frontline, very inexpensive measure that we all need to do. You know, I think the other thing that's really interesting and that is coming out rapidly is the amount of laboratory data, research studies that are looking closely at what constitutes a immunity against the virus and how long does it last? Those are key questions. So in the natural infection, we all develop an immune response unless you're immune compromised, you know, and that could happen as well. But in the normal situation, we all developed antibodies, and everybody's familiar with that concept of antibodies forming from a natural infection or a vaccine. One of the questions is how long do they last? And that really influences on a population basis the kind of curves we see or the kind of resurgence that we're going to see. So if the virus infection results in immunity that is only 40 weeks or less, and it doesn't sustain after that, we may see second surges of the virus, and we have to recognize that. And that's true with other infections. Influenza is a different virus. It reassorts, it changes its genome. So we have to actually prepare each and every year for a new strain of the virus. In coronaviruses, they'll mutate and they'll evolve over time. We don't know whether they're going to get less virulent or more virulent, meaning that cause more disease. And interesting, the first SARS outbreak, so this would be the first SARS that was in 2002, late emerging, that happened and involved about 8,000 people, but there was very quick testing for the virus and isolation. But in addition, the virus was different. It didn't spread as easily, and it also didn't shed from asymptomatic individuals like SARS-2, CoV-2. And that's a difference in just the virus and the etiology of how it influences the course of the epidemiology. So we're still studying that, and there's a lot of rapid information coming out from different population studies around the world of how long does natural immunity occur? Does it involve also cells, so B and T cells, which are longer lasting, or cell-mediated immunity? Those are very important questions as well. And then, of course, as you mentioned, vaccine development. And vaccines are clearly part of that answer. And the amount of massive effort that is being done around the world and here in Davis around the vaccine, and whether we can use that as well, even if that is partially protective, and if we can get enough people with the vaccine, it can be delivered safely, that will be a key determinant of dampening down the future surges in the rate of infection.
So I'm really hoping that this changes kind of societal's mindset about vaccines, that we really begin a national discussion about the importance of medical research. The fact that Tony Fauci is one of the most beloved individuals in the country by far and away most people, I think is just a testament to how, clinical research and the importance of clinical research has just hit the mainstream. And, the fact that the man on the street, for example, is asking, when do you think we'll have a vaccine? I mean, that's a fascinating thing. I never thought as a dean of a school of medicine that people would be asking me that. So it is one of the things that has really come to the forefront is the importance of research. For example, generally to get remdesivir, you have to participate in a research trial because there's a national shortage of remdesivir, which is the only drug that's really been shown to shorten the course when you're put on a ventilator. I think most people in the country would not realize that. They would have thought, well, it's approved, it's out there, we can get it. So there's not only shortages of drugs, there's shortages of the reagents, as we've discussed. So, I think again, it goes back to the new normal. The new normal is going to be both how we conduct ourselves personally with masks and hand washing for a long, long time. There's going to be a lot less travel, a lot more Zoom. It's going to be a new normal for education. And as educators, we're all going to be pushed to do more than just give a talk online on Zoom and really be interactive, as you said, and then figure out how to do those critical courses. We have medical students in our hospital now who are taking care of patients. And they're not taking care of patients with COVID, known COVID, but they are taking care of patients. So we've got them back in because, we need to train doctors, and now more than ever, we need doctors. So it's just, it is an unprecedented time, and I've used that word more than I care to admit, but it is truly an unprecedented time. And UC Davis is uniquely positioned to really respond to that with the vet med school, engineering, nursing, medicine, and it's really positioned us very well to be nimble and to be responsive. And it's my hope that we can bring some of these new technologies on board sooner than later.
Definitely.
Well, this has been really a great discussion, Michael. I hope that you'll join us next when we talk more about vaccines and national clinical trials. And I'm Allison Brashear, the Dean of UC Davis School of Medicine.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of topics that we can get into, and we have more to delve into on our next podcast. So please come back and listen. I'm Michael Larimore, Dean of the School of veterinary medicine at UC Davis, and you've been listening to the Deans Discuss COVID-19 podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you see our next episode, which we're going to go into more of these very interesting topics more in depth as we look at our new reality.
And we welcome your questions and ideas on topics for the future episodes. You can email us at deansdiscuss@ucdavis.edu. And in the meantime, you can visit ucdavis.edu/COVID-19 for the latest coronavirus research and news from UC Davis.